Our next presenter is Sophie Wade. She is the founder and workforce innovation specialist at Flexcel Network, who is helping companies transition to future of work environments. Sophie, the floor is yours.
Let's get this clicker. Oh, whoa, to the end. Okay. Hi. So I'm here to talk about what goes on in the workspace and how things are really changing. And it's a more human place these days. It's more organic, and I don't mean Birkenstocks and granola, or I don't mean kale or quinoa, but it is a much more natural way of working, and I'm here to sort of talk about why, what's going on, what's in transition, and why it's important, and how we can really transition to that new way of working. What hasn't worked? Well, I think we all know very well what hasn't worked. What hasn't worked is, feeling like cogs in the machine, autocratic bosses who issue directives, and treating employees like they're all the same and they're dispensable assets. 81% of people in the 2014 Gallup poll were either actively disengaged or not engaged in their work. Well, corporations are obviously waking up to the fact that that means that people aren't making the best decisions, they're not coming up with the best strategies or executing the best plans. So things need a change. Work is being redefined in almost every way, and I'm not suggesting that we need to be sitting in a lotus position on a chair meditating, although that has been proven already to increase productivity because of focus and also reduce stress and therefore healthcare costs. But it is really about changing the idea from being towards a sort of more individualized, more personal experience, as we were just hearing about. I love this picture, whatever it's all about. But basically, this is where the change is coming from. And I think the why is really important because we all kind of really need to understand that, because we have a lot of, the non-millennials in the room do have a lot of kind of legacy habits and thoughts and judgments that we get caught up in. So technology first. Why is technology? I think we've heard a lot about technology already. But for me, it's at the core because really it changes the game in so many ways in terms of what we can do and how we can work differently. And millennials, we have over 65% of American adults have powerful mobile computers in their hands. And that means they can work anywhere at any time. It also means that leveraging those computers, we have business software and applications, which we've been hearing about as well, which are empowering people in unprecedented ways. Put those in the hands of millennials, and first of all, I will give a disclaimer. I am not debating whether millennials are different or would be, but boomers and Xers in the same position would be any different to millennials. The point is that millennials are the first generation who are coming in, enabled with all this technology, and as a result kind of going, well, if we can work differently, why aren't we? And we should be. They also, millions of them, are also coming into the workplace when, with the Great Recession, and they weren't able to get the full-time jobs and have the types of careers and have the money to be able to have the typical sort of trajectory and buy the same kind of things, buy cars or buy houses in the same way. And rather than, in my opinion, rather than saying kind of like, my life sucks, they owned it. And they said, well, actually, the fact that I'm not working a 100-hour job is not bad. And, if I can do things differently, why aren't I? So they're asking for more from their work, from their life. And they're really looking for a culture that resonates, and they're looking for value. The concept of work is changing, and what we're actually asking of our work environment, and why we're there, and what we're contributing to. And it's this purpose-driven culture that we're hearing a lot about, that we all actually enjoy more if we can feel that we actually understand why we're there and what we're contributing to. It makes us all feel better about what we're doing. We also it's about respecting employees' individuality, because that way we're actually going to engage them and they're going to be more productive. in respecting people as individuals, it actually means that you don't have the autocratic leader. You have somebody who is putting themselves in other people's position. And empathy is now the key characteristic of leadership. That's a pretty radical change from what we've had in the past. It really is. And recognizing employees' contributions. Well, there are a lot of people kind of like, oh my God, the whole Instagram thing and the like, and I don't really want to thank my employees as much. Well, it doesn't really cost anything. A lot of employee recognition doesn't cost you anything, but it gets a lot back. Innovation and creativity, which we've heard about today as well, is critical, and people work in different ways. I don't know if you like to sit on a metal block and, sort of come up with things like that, but no matter what your particular way of being productive and leveraging your strengths and leveraging your creativity, the office environment needs to sort of understand that as well as your work situation. So workplace flexibility, the way that it's moving right now, it's multifaceted. It's really thinking about the person, their circumstances, their working circumstances, their working style, their working profile. Where do they want to work? When are they most productive? I'm most productive between 9 and 11 at night. Other people, there's a guy who I work with who works best between 8 and 10. So he stays home to work so that he's not traveling and missing out on his most productive time. And really adjusting to that and understanding where and how people work best. And people can actually be sharing and generating ideas when they're around the foosball table. And I use that because it's kind of like a joke these days about foosball tables. But constant learning. Again, technology is really changing the game in terms of the accelerated pace of learning. And that's the big in big data, and how do we deal with that, and how do we assimilate all that knowledge? So training, which has really sort of dropped off, is being much more incorporated, as well as the fact that people are needing to constantly keep up to date and be current in terms of the applications. You have constant feedback loops. Instead of having product cycles, you almost have continuous loops of product sort of succession and reinvention as things are sort of moving fast in a very different way than they have in the past. Blurred boundaries. Which one is actually the office and which one is the home? The interesting thing about this is creating different environments where people can work and be most productive. It also means that you've gone from a fixed work was a fixed place and a time. And now it's become an activity which can be done anywhere. The challenge with that for most people is that in the past, it created boundaries for us. We didn't actually have to come up with those boundaries ourselves. And that's actually a discipline which is hard to do. And so whilst work is being done in the evening, at night, and at home, or wherever, it's also the social aspects, and people are on Facebook in the office. As long as the work gets done, it doesn't really matter where or when people and how people are working. But creating boundaries for ourselves is something that corporations are needing to step in and sort of help with, because it isn't that easy to create them for oneself. Communication channels have been multiplying. And one of the interesting things about how technology is sort of impacting us in terms of you have people who are working from home. They need to be set up. Jonathan was talking about some of the sort of technology and how that works. It also in terms of how you're enabling people who aren't working in the office all the time and how seamlessly to integrate them, both so that they're feeling part of the community of your company, as well as sometimes external workers and how they're being included. And I know I have friends who are only with sort of Facebook with, and other ones who are only on Instagram. Well, what about employees? The employees that you're dealing with are only dealing with email or text. And whether it's an efficiency or speed or whatever it might be, understanding each person as an individual and the different platforms that you need to optimize for and how you're going to be optimizing for that and reaching them, these things need to be sort of understood and created when you're dealing with the workspace. A flatter eye hierarchy, the interesting thing about the sort of facility that millennials have with technology means that the sort of seniority in a project can be flipped. If it's a technology-based project, it means that rather than years of experience, it may just be someone's expertise in a particular area. that is quite hard. It's a very different transition for people to be making in terms of who rightfully should be more senior in that particular project. And what we're seeing is that you can have responsibility and authority, which is project-based. It's temporal. And so, one of the interesting things about open plan offices is it's a physical manifestation of a different approach to how hierarchy and responsibility and authority works. But there's a coherence between the attitude and the approach that people are taking and actually how the physical layout of the office is, and that's important. At the same time, the linear, continuous, compounding career is over. If you aren't convinced and you think that it's sort of evolving and it's going to be over soon, then by definition it's already over. So what does that mean? The new paradigms, and these are quite simple words, but they're radically different from what we've had in the past, is that professionals are focusing or need to focus on income, not jobs. And corporations, it's about individualized and latticed careers. And when we're talking about professionals, it's really sort of thinking because full-time jobs aren't as permanent. There'll be lots of full-time jobs, but they just won't be as permanent. Part-time jobs, freelancers. It's a sort of evolving workforce, and people will be doing bits and pieces of one and the other. It's really about understanding, what is my revenue-generating potential and how I'm going to be actually implementing it. Career dynamics. So nonlinear. People are going from full-time jobs to maybe part-time with some freelancing. I might be an entrepreneur. I might be a solopreneur. Many different things, many different paths, many different careers over the course of the lifetime. It's also about taking my skills and applying them in different ways in different sectors depending on the situation. So it's not about me being in marketing and applying my marketing skills all the way through, but taking those skills and the functionality that I'm good at and applying them in different ways in different situations. So what does that mean about actually what happens inside corporations? People, where we see things are happening in terms of the disappearance of this linear career is job rotation. And people actually being moved around more. They end up being a much more well-rounded sort of executive who's had more experience in other, sort of understands more dimensions of the organization than somebody who only stayed in that one particular track. So it's very powerful, but it also engages. It means you sort of get a different job within the organization than, you don't have to leave because you're sort of leaving that job. But what does that actually mean for kind of like what the office looks like and how you're moving people around? Also in terms of how and where those people are moving to, there are technologies and plans. This is still very much in an evolutionary state because it's complicated. There are technologies which are do with sort of mapping someone's skills and then also mapping the functionality in different corporate roles and then overlaying one to the other to see what adjacent jobs there are that might be interesting to that person and moving that person within the organization. So it's complex. And in the meantime, before some of those plans are really engaged, what we're seeing is there's a lot of mentoring that needs to happen. And mentoring between, millennials or the new generation that are in the workforce who don't have as much guidance. They can see that there's no linear career there, but there's nothing to replace it. And so a lot of millennials aren't staying in corporations because nobody is telling them, this is how we're going to develop your potential. This is why you should stay. Meantime, as well, the boomers and Xers also understand that the linear career is really over, but nobody is also telling them. The high potentials, the top 10% are being taken care of, but nobody else. So this is where technology understanding can be shared, and so there's a lot of reverse mentoring as well. But guidance and development and employees working together in mentoring roles is actually really helping deal with this sort of interim gap while these other things are being taken are sort of evolving. External workers, and here I also mean employees who are working remotely, as well as a sort of the larger sort of ebb and flow, the accordion, as one senior executive at a big agency was saying. We have an accordion, and our company expands and contracts depending on projects and client needs. You also want to have, in that, they want to have freelancers who are a fit culturally. So it's people that they're familiar with. So it's not different freelancers every time. There's sort of pools of freelancers. It's like a sort of secondary workforce who are not employees, who are then so there are dotted lines now really on corporations. They're not sort of fixed, this is the edge of sort of who we are. Because there's there's a greater expanse, the expanded network that companies now have. Dealing with, and you know, it's a very powerful in terms of exploring new marketplaces, dealing with seasonal changes and seasonal needs. So what we really have is people understanding the physiology of the organization. And it's a much more fluid, it's a much more human, it's more of a living, organic, growing and evolving with the individual personalities who actually work in an organization. As some of them leave or as new people come on board, you will have those people impacting the culture and how the organization works. Because there's a much more strategic focus on the talent and how they're going to be managed and the environment. And so it really is a sort of, the winning trifecta appears to be, as we're really working on first principles here, the history, you cannot look to history these days to project the future. It's working on first principles to really understand what's going to work for this company, what's going to work for these employees and the way we're set up. And it's about mindset, the culture, the mindset, the philosophies that you have about the workplace. It's about the policies, the frameworks that you put in place that are actually implementing and executing that mindset and how you want to work with your employees. And third, of course, is the environment and how you're actually allowing those people to interact and enjoy and celebrate their strengths and really develop them. It's a very, very different workplace, but it's very exciting. Thank you.
And what are some best practices that you can share about how to really create a cohesive culture when people are disparate, working agile, remotely working? How do you create that culture?
Right now, honestly, we're really in transition, and there are best practices don't really exist yet. The next 5 to 10 years are going to be, and this is a technical term, messy. And I really mean that. There's a very interesting article by McKinsey which was really sort of saying there are no best practices because everybody, if you talk to organizations, everybody's experimenting. They have different people, different divisions, different departments, different ways of experimenting with different things, whether it's environmental, whether it's technology, whether it's, you know, who is working from where and what their different working profile is and their different working style. The most cohesive thing is the culture. So things that can be helpful is to have people work together first before they're working remotely. But if they're starting off working remotely, it really is about the easiest sort of fundamental thing is to be articulating your values very, very clearly and having that be coherent in everything that you do, in every policy that you have, in every message that goes out internally and externally. That is going to help because it is hard to have a sense of community and have a strong sense of culture when people are very distributed. That's for sure.
Sophie, Peter Miskovich, JLL. One quick question. If the contingent workforce today is about 30%, 2020 predicted maybe 50%, mm-hmm. 2030 at 80%, what are your thoughts on that trajectory of 80% of the workforce adopting this type of model, the Hollywood, team-based portfolio career model? Do you see that same trajectory? And I guess I'd ask the other question, what will be the challenge for organizations to adopt that level of variability in workforce?
I think this goes back to my messy thing. I don't know, it's going to 80 or 100, but I think what it is, there are always going to be full-time jobs. There are always going to be part-time jobs and freelancers and contractors. We're all going to do them at different times. It will flow. Some people will have more full-time jobs, but they just won't have permanent full-time jobs. The permanent full-time job is done, but they'll just be sort of moving between organizations, and so it's sort of more of a trajectory like this in terms of revenue generation. I think we're all going to start to get used to it, and I think corporations are, there are many people, so in the Great Recession, a lot of people lost their jobs and they became freelancers. Millions did not go back into full-time jobs because they chose to, a working in sort of style, a lifestyle that they preferred. So there's a lot of choice in choosing not to be in those full-time environments. And a lot of people are choosing, sort of say, I would rather sort of sit on my toadstool and be an expert and work for the companies that I really want to. So there are a lot of different choices, and people will need to sort of have more awareness of how they work best and under what environment they enjoy working, and then they excel and they can really apply their strengths. So I think corporations, by the same token, can also understand kind of like these are the roles that we need to have on a full-time, more permanent basis, longer-term basis, for these dedicated basis for these reasons. And other people who we need experts. We don't need them full-time. We need them sort of part-time. We explore, different avenues, different products. Everybody's going to sort of understand there's a lot of win-win in this flexibility, but we're so unused to it, and we're so used to working in very, very fixed structures that this in and of itself is hard because we're not used to this many choices. And that's challenging. If you imagine Uber creates a framework within which people can work flexibly. So I think less about structures than frameworks. And if you can create frameworks that you can work more fluidly within, that can be a sort of powerful way of looking at it that sort of feels more stable, but allows for some of the dynamics of business. And business is evolving so fast that this is what we need. It sort of helps sort of put a shell around it.
All right, well, thank you so much, Sophie. Can we get a round of applause, please?